Hello, my friends. We're going to up-level your intelligence. We're going to up-level your creativity today. And I'm going to challenge you a little bit. We're going to get into some very tricky material. And we're going to begin with the evocative title, hopefully the evocative title that brought you here, which is how intelligent people use astrology. A little bit strange up front, right? Because we're not used to thinking about astrology as something that is the source of intelligence or the source of truth. Some of you are, some of you dabble with it, or other forms of divination, such as human design, tarot, these kinds of similar type of thing. But most of us, we don't consider it as something that's actually real. We do not consider it as something that's valid, and so therefore we don't use it. Now, today, I want to share with you a strange experience that I had last week now, where I actually visited a reader and I got a reading done. The reading in this case was astrology in human design. The latter I wasn't terribly familiar with at the time, although I learned a little bit more about it since. And it posed me with a problem that we're working out here. And the problem is this: the reading was excellent. It was so good. It was everything that I needed personally. Stuff came up that was just of crucial importance that I was able to take away and integrate into my life with great benefit. Now, what do I do about that? What do I do about the fact that I had a profound, healing, and informative, growth-inducing experience based off of two divination systems that come from, that are just based on your birthday? What do we do about the fact that when you really take something like astrology and bring it into the laboratory, you do a study, like a really good controlled, double-blind, placebo-controlled study on astrology, and you get nothing. It shows nothing. It does not indicate at all whatsoever the reality of these things. How is it that something so scientifically invalid can produce such an incredibly personally valid experience? Now, when I say this, I know what you're thinking, right? Because there's sort of a classic explanation. And the explanation inside of our culture, inside of the hegemony of our culture, is that it's sort of a con where when you look up your horoscope, say, it says a bunch of vague, general, broad enough statements that if you were committed enough, you can just read into it and project your own stuff subconsciously onto it and have it reflected back at you. And then you have this experience of, oh, wow, I'm being told about myself. When in reality, it's like looking at a Rorschach style painting. I don't know if I said that right. These like ink blot tests where you look at them and you project onto them from your subconscious mind whatever you see on them. And so this is the classic explanation, but this is not a very validating explanation. And in reality, it's not a match with what I experienced. Now, it's not just this that I'm talking about. I've actually had very profound moments with numerology, calculating my life path, which is calculated in a similar way. You just take your birthday again, and you add up the numbers and gives you your numerology life path, among other things. And then also just psychic experiences. I've had tons of psychic experiences, doing readings of people, being read by other people, having very unlikely occurrences happen. And even as they happen, it feeling like there's an extra component, like a valid component, like something very real is taking place here. And I notice it, and the other person notices it, and everybody in the room, we all feel like something's happening. And again, once you bring it under the fluorescent lights of a laboratory setting, and you put it under controls, and you try to make it happen, poof, it's gone. I don't know what to do about that. Or I didn't. I know now. So if you are suffering from the same confusion, then listen to this. Come with me on this journey. Because we're going to go in a direction that understands this problem. It solves this problem in a way that you are not required to believe anything. I'm not going to ask you to believe anything. I'm not going to ask you to take anything on faith. And I'm not even going to ask you to lower your intelligence at all. So you keep all of your intelligence, you keep your critical faculty, you keep your critical thinking, your discernment, all of that we take with us. We're on an integrative journey, you see. So we're integrating everything that we've gleaned, everything that we've gained, everything that we've earned so far on our journey into intelligence, into evolution, is kept and integrated, and more is added to it. And nothing is being subtracted, because there's a place for everything. Have we ever met before? My name is Brent. It is lovely to meet you, especially if this is your first video, my first video of mine that you're viewing, you know what I mean? So grateful that you stopped by. I'm a coach. I coach people out of chaos and into order, out of chaos, disempowerment and into empowerment, and out of friction and into flow. And if you're interested in the one-on-one coaching work that I offer, there is a link for that below in the description of this video. So go ahead and check that out, and you'll learn all about it, including how to get your first session for free. You get a free intake session, and we'll talk about it from there. So let's begin here. Let's begin by talking about materialism. Materialism, if you don't know, is a basic way of viewing the world. It's a basic philosophy. And the philosophy states that that which is fundamentally real about reality, about like everything, the universe, is atoms and energy. That's what everything is basically made out of. Now, you could break up those atoms into subatomic particles and break those down into further things. But the materialist idea is that matter, the stuff out there, is what everything is made out of. And importantly for our discussion, it's objects, the objective world. Now, to have consciousness, to have subjectivity, which is, the wherewithal to be a subject, the wherewithal to perceive, and then from there to think about things, to perceive things, to have internal subjective experiences of love or frustration, or to even something like doing math in your head, all of these being subjective experiences. A materialist would say that the subjective stuff is made out of the objective stuff. So it's like objective stuff first, objects, rocks, elements, atoms, trees. All of that is out there. And then the sense of subjectivity, it's sort of an epiphenomenon that comes as a result of the brain. And as a result, consciousness was invented when brains were invented, say, and then once all the brains are gone, then consciousness is gone and you're just left with objects. And so as I describe this, I hope by now you can recognize this as the basic cultural standpoint that we're all in. It's not like we all talk about this all the time when we're out in the world in public, but this is the basic sort of hegemony. This is the basic assumption that we all have and operate from. This is, if you're in high standing in society, if you want to be standing well with society, then this is kind of the position that you take. And it's sort of easy to defend because it's king right now. And this is for good reason, because this came as a result of religious superstition. So before we had the before we had the Enlightenment, and the scientific method come about, and calculus and physics and medicine and germ theory and everything that came as a result of the Enlightenment, we had religious fundamentalism. And what we considered to be truth was whatever came out of the Bible. That's how we evaluated if it was true or not. And then when scientific materialism came on board, then we evaluated truth based on what came as a result of experiments and the scientific method and studies, and whether multiple scientists could corroborate something over time. And then if they could, we would consider that to be true. And so that's where it stands today. Now it's worth mentioning, a bleeding edge of a new movement that you may recognize as I discover it, which is not modernism, but postmodernism. And the postmodernist take is that truth is entirely subjective. So there's no such thing as truth the way a scientist would have it, but instead truth is just there's just a multiplicity of truths. There's just as many truths as there are people, and there's any attempt to assert one overarching truth is just a power grab. This is the postmodernist point of view. But beyond postmodernism, there's a new stage, and that's where you and I are concerned, which is called integral. And the integral point of view is that it's no longer useful to ask if something is real or not. It's no longer useful to ask if something is true or not. Instead, what we now want to ask is the way in which. In which way is this true? In which way is this real? So now returning to something, again, such as astrology. Notice how it feels when I say, I wonder if astrology is true or not. Feel that. And now feel this. In what way is astrology true? In what way is astrology real? See, what I notice is that there's sort of almost an exuberance, almost a relief and an excitement that comes online. Because when we're asking if something is true or not, it's very much black and white thinking. It's very discriminatory, judgmental. And we're placing ourselves as the judge. We look at something and we decide if something is true or not. Whereas instead, when we ask, in what way is this true? We are beginning with the assumption that there's nothing that is untrue. There's nothing that is not real. And instead, we want to find its place. And this is the key behind integral style thinking. Some quick credit should go out before I continue, which is that integral theory is the brainchild, the intellectual creation of Ken Wilber and his large set of books. He spent his whole life publishing books on integral theory. And it's fascinating. And to me, it's been a huge relief to learn about this. If you're resonating with what I'm saying so far, then you need to go to Ken Wilber's Integral Theory and start with sex, ecology, and spirituality. I suggest starting there. So in what way is something real? We're looking to put everything in its place. Because the problem with postmodernism, when you say, everything is equally true forever, this doesn't work. Because some ideas and some points of view are of lower and higher quality than others. So there's a place for every point of view. And there's no point of view exactly that's right or wrong. We want to know the way in which it's true, the way in which it's real, and then we also want to know its limitations. So taking something like astrology once again, but you can also replace this with human design. It would be incorrect to go to an astrology reading the way I did and then just accept everything that is said without any critical faculty, without any discernment whatsoever. Somebody says, okay, your birthday tells you about your personality and you are this and what this means about you. And this is your limitation. And by the way, over this next week, you should not do this. But next week after, you should do this. And you take all of that in and you operate only from that point of view. This would be very bad. And this is not advised. And this is not truth. But then, of course, there's another, say the materialist standpoint as well, seeing as astrology cannot and will never be proven in a laboratory. It's not real and it's not valid, and therefore it's just only hallucinations and imagination and tomfoolery and hypnosis. That's all it is. This is not correct either. Astrology is real, but it's real in a subjective way. So pay attention now to these terms. Subjectively real and objectively real. And notice how you react unconsciously to these, because you're going to feel a difference when I give you these two terms. If I say something over here is objectively real, it's objectively real. It's been proven, it's objectively real. Notice how that feels, right? It feels valid, solid, almost beyond argument, unquestionable. It's just objectively true. It's like that stone that's over there on that street. No argument there. But if I say this thing over here is subjectively true, it's subjectively true. What does that do for you? A little bit more wishy-washy, a little bit more questionable, a little bit more gray area in there. Maybe not so reliable. maybe not something that we want to necessarily assume is true. And so one of the major gifts that we get from integral theory is that something can be objectively real or it can be subjectively real. And in either case, it's real. Because the cultural hegemony in this moment is that we actually conflate objectively real as just being real. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, if I, in our culture, if I say something's real, you kind of interpret that subconsciously as being objectively real. And if I say something's subjectively real, it's almost as if I were saying it's fake real. You see what I'm saying? Now, there are different ways of verifying the reality of something that's objective or subjective. Now, if something is objectively real, if I say it's raining outside, then if it's an objective claim, it's an empirical claim. And if I make an empirical claim, then it is subject to empirical scrutiny. So if I say it's raining, you go out to the window and hold your hand out the window and you check if it's raining. And if it is indeed, if you feel rain on your hand, then we agree. We've done some science and we agree on the same thing. And that's how we verify what has been said. For something that is subjective, it is a little bit different. It's based on truth-telling and honesty. So let's say I were your coach, or I were your therapist, or we're just hanging out, and we're talking about something in your world, and you don't tell the truth, you lie about something. Well, oftentimes that lie creates a bit of a strange feeling, a sense of confusion in our field. You may have noticed it if you're sensitive to these kinds of things. But even if you're not, when there's a lie, when there's a falsehood, it creates an awkwardness that makes the conversation confusing because there's a duality, a duplicity in the conversation. There's two things going on and they're not merging, they're not resolving, they're not coming together. And then, there are situations where we lie and then the lie goes on and on and on, and there's this big tension that builds up. And the lie is basically unstable internally, whether just inside of yourself or between you and me, intersubjectively. But when you tell the truth, when you're being honest about your experience, then there's a congruence and a simplicity and a naturalness, and that is the feeling of truth coming through. Now, something that I think is very interesting but very challenging and slightly beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but I want to touch on it just really quickly with you, maybe we can get into it a little bit later, is what is the actual, what is that thing? Like, for example, if I tell you a lie, if I just say to you, there's 2 moons, Earth has 2 moons. Did you know? Earth has 2 moons. Something strange is going on where I gave you a piece of information, and this piece of information is a real piece of information. Like, I actually said something. I actually gave you a real idea. And so it has what we could call ontological or being reality. It has being status of some kind, even though the substance of that thing is a lie and is a falsehood. So what is the nature of that thing? Now check this out. What if we looked at something else, like, say, the Harry Potter universe? I personally have only read one of the books. I'm familiar with the lore, but not as deep as, say, an actual fan. But there's something about the Harry Potter universe where just take a minute to think about it and feel into it. Feel the reality of the Harry Potter universe. Is it real or not? And in what way is it real? Excuse me, I used the bad question. In what way is Harry Potter, the Harry Potter universe, real? Because it seems to have some sort of substance quality to it. It seems to exist in some way, even though it does not exist objectively. It does not exist in our objective physical world. But especially when you get so many people, like, think of the whole fandom of Harry Potter, everybody that's a fan of Harry Potter, all of the canonical and non-canonical contributions to Harry Potter, all the movies, all of the different ways it's been conceptualized. It's something that has been brought to life in a very real way. And there's different theories about how to consider that. Like some people say that, and when you die and you go back to being a non-physical entity, perhaps you could go visit these realms because they're real. They've been made real through the contributed imagination of so many people. Or maybe say in an out-of-body experience or a hypnosis experience, or even in a dream, you can go visit these places. And then we can maybe even make arguments that you are not, it doesn't just seem that you're going to those places, but you really are going to those places. So something to think about. So we don't really know the ontological reality of these places, but it's fun to imagine. Either way, the most important thing for you to take away from this little journey we went on here is that it's real in a subjective way when we're talking about just like your own personality. And even more importantly, when we look at the Harry Potter universe or when we look at astrology, it is intersubjectively real. So when I went for my reading that I was telling you about a little while ago, the psychic that I was speaking to, she pulled out all sorts of things, having just met me on the spot. She was able to pull out my work, the kind of work that I'm into. She told me a few things about my personality that, again, was more than just like broad strokes that I would just, apply subconsciously to in a Rorschach style way. It was a very, there was a interpsychic, intersubjective connection that had happened, and there was a highway of information. There was a beautiful communication that was going back and forth, and she was very much pulling out of my own field things that I needed to hear. And then of crucial importance, the most important, this is the value from my money spent, was that I gained insight on how to move forward. I gained new perspective on issues that I was working with, and I was able to move forward. And I realized, among many other things, like for example, just speaking personally for a minute, when I often have ideas for videos that I want to make for you. There's things that I want to talk about with you, but I actually have a lot of friction that I run into along the way. Even still, after having spoken about the flow state with you for a million years, there's still little bits of friction that I run into that I need to get out of the way in order to speak with you more clearly. And that's an example of just one of many things that came up in that reading. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you. So now it brings me to my most important point, which is I want to ask you, where do you consider truth to come from? Take a minute now, and I would love if you left a comment saying where you consider truth comes from. Because as a religious fundamentalist, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever else, we consider truth to be that which comes from the Holy Scriptures, holy texts. And then as modernists, as materialists, truth is what comes from science, from objective, from the objective space, from the empirical studies that we do. For a postmodernist, truth is whatever an individual is experiencing in that moment. That's what truth is. And whatever an individual even thinks, however an individual feels, that's truth. It's totally contextual within that person. And then from an integral perspective, truth is available everywhere, and we're interested in where it fits and how it comes together. But I would take this even further and say that no matter what, you want to pay attention to when you consider truth to be coming from outside of yourself. And there's an ultimate move that we need to make if we want to benefit from everything we've established here. If we want to benefit from astrology or human design, tarot readings, from science, from a religious experience, from Burning Man, from a concert, from a musician, from a teacher, a professor, a parent. Like whenever we want to take in truth, there's a crucial shift that we have to make, which is we need to learn how to insource our authority. Insourcing our authority means I know what truth is. And it means I know when what is being said to me is true. So what I want for you, even having gone through what we went through just now today, I don't want you to just take any of this with me. That's why I said at the very beginning, it's not your job to just believe what I'm saying. I'm not giving you something to believe. I'm giving you something, and I'm saying it to you, and I want you to tell me if it's true or not. And I want you to know that you know if it's true or not. And what's kind of cool is that even this final move of insourcing your authority steps beyond even the subjective and the objective quality. Because you can't go to anyone to tell you what's true. If you do, if you go to somebody, a priest, a holy man, a Buddhist monk, Eckhart Tolle, like if you go to anybody to tell you what's true, there's still a giving away of yourself to somebody else, and you're missing the point. Nobody can do this for you. Only you can decide what's true in the end. This is autonomy. This is sovereignty. And then once you ground that sovereignty, that autonomy in, once it's in, then you can receive truth from everywhere. Everywhere. The texts from science, from the postmodernists, from a reader, from a psychic, from a healer, from an energy worker, from an intellectual, from Jordan Peterson, from Gabor Mate, I don't know, anybody, Sam Harris, Leo Gura, anybody. Your spouse, your parent, your child, your coworker. And you can be open, and imagine the richness of being that open, where truth comes from everywhere. Reality comes from everywhere, and nothing is invalidated anymore. You don't, no longer is this true or not. It's just, okay, how is it true? How does it apply? How does it fit in? It's so loose and flexible, and then life becomes juicy because now you're wandering through a field of truth. So that's how astrology uses intelligent people. Let's try that again. That's how intelligent people use astrology. It's an invitation into a higher intelligence. You can see now, higher creativity, higher sovereignty, higher personal liberation. Very, very important stuff. Hit that like button for me, please. Check out my one-on-one coaching practice. Love you to bits. See you on the next one.